All right. So last week we learned about Hillel and Shammai, about these two very old rabbis around the turn of the Common Era, and they weren't even called rabbis because rabbis weren't really a thing back then. But these were really the founders of rabbinic thought, or at least the first names that we get when talking about rabbinic thought, when talking about this group of people who are right around the destruction of the first temple. For Hillel and Shammai, it was before the destruction, but we knew it was coming. We knew some sort of new form of Judaism was coming. And so Hillel and Shammai are in two different schools of thought about what is this new Judaism going to look like. So I found this wonderful video from Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies and Bimbam that talks about Hillel and Shammai and their whole notion of disagreements for the sake of heaven. So I'm going to play this 3-minute video, and then we'll talk a little bit what's the significance of these two figures in our tradition.
"2,000 years ago, the Jewish world was divided between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. They seemed to disagree about everything. How to celebrate the holidays, who can marry whom, what foods can be eaten, how do we speak with people, whom do we allow into our schools, and of course, who's right? Nevertheless, the Mishnah states that they conducted the many disagreements in a healthy and constructive manner, known as disagreements for the sake of heaven. Machloket l'shem shamayim. However, the Mishnah doesn't explain what exactly about these disagreements made them for the sake of heaven. The commentaries in the Mishnah offer 4 explanations. Each one comes with a tip for engaging in constructive conflict. The first explanation: despite the sharp disagreements between the houses, they succeeded in maintaining close relationships, eating in each other's homes, and marrying with one another. So the first tip for engaging in constructive conflict is debate the issues without attacking people and damaging relationships. The second was that Hillel, Shammai, and their students had a motivation for their disagreements beyond the purpose of winning and gaining honor. Perhaps they were trying to arrive at the best solution for everyone. So the second tip for constructive conflict is check your motivations. Are you trying to win or solve problems? Point 3. In the disagreements between houses, each listened to the other side and was open to admitting they might be wrong when the evidence presented supported the other side. So the third way to engage in constructive conflict is listen to the other side and be open to admitting that you may just be wrong. The commentaries make a fourth point. Both Hillel and Shammai and their students equally spoke the words of the living God. They were both correct, despite holding opposite opinions. So the fourth tip for managing conflicts constructively is consider that you both might be right, even though you hold opposite positions. This was how Hillel and Shammai managed their disagreements some 2,000 years ago. The question is, how do we today manage our disagreements between peers, family members, neighbors, or even political parties, nations, and religions? Do we too try to maintain good relationships while disagreeing? Do we check to see if our motivations are not just about winning the argument? Are we open to admitting that we may just be wrong? Can we acknowledge that sometimes we may just both be right? And perhaps we can also constructively manage the many conflicts and disagreements of today for the sake of heaven.
This video is leading up to what Pardes put out as the Jewish Day of Constructive Conflict. The Talmud has a whole lot of this constructive conflict, and Hillel and Shammai are really the first ones to put out this format of conversation. Now, keep in mind that in Jewish text, after Tanakh, and really in Tanakh after Torah, the Talmud is not presented as chronological. So it's not like Hillel and Shammai come first and then later rabbis come later. Hillel and Shammai are peppered throughout our sacred text. And then we have those commentaries within the text, those commentaries on Hillel and Shammai that are positioned kind of around their text, after and around their text. So I want to show just one example of a disagreement between Hillel and Shammai. So this is from the Talmud. This is from Tractate Shabbat. And we're not talking about Shabbat. We're actually talking about Hanukkah in this section. So I'll talk you through this bit of Talmud, and then we'll figure out what's significant about Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. So the sages taught in a Baraita, and a Baraita is a little bit of text. The sages taught that the basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light kindled by a person, the head of the household, for themselves and their household. Okay, so Sephora, what does that mean to have a light kindled by a person? Just, I'm asking very literally.
Very literally light a candle.
Yeah, light a candle. Right, one person lights one candle. And the Mehadrin, who are the strict ones, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. So Cantor Neil, what does that mean practically?
That means that when the Schwartzes are all together at Hanukkah time, we have, at this point, we're still not up to having a separate menorah for the husband and wife of each of my 3 married pairs of kids, but at least 5 Chanukiot, one for mom, one for me, one for my eldest son and his wife and daughter. Actually, no, there was one for my granddaughter. Right. One for my middle son and his wife, who don't have any grandkids yet, and one for my daughter and her husband. And since their little one is under 2, she didn't get her own menorah.
And so in the modern day, that's a lot of candles.
Yep.
Because in the modern day, on the 8th night of Hanukkah, all those lights are lit, but quite literally here, for the Mehadrin, for the strict ones, that's just one light per each person. Right? So step 1, if we want to be as base level as we can, it's one light, one person, one household, right? This second level is one light per person in the household. So now the Mehadrin, Mina Mehadrin, the really, 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 really strict ones, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are going to disagree. Beit Shammai says, on the first day, one will kindle 8 lights, and then they decrease number of lights. So for Beit Shammai, 8 lights on the first night, 8 lights per person. Well, actually, he doesn't say per person, but nowadays we say per person. But he says 8 lights on the first night, 7 on the second, 6 on the third, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Beit Hillel says, the house of Hillel says, okay, on the first day, one kindles 1 light, and then 2, 3, et cetera, up until we get to 8 nights. So that's our disagreement between Shammai and Hillel. Later in the text, we're going to learn that Beit Shammai's opinion is going to correspond to the incoming days, which corresponds to the number of bulls that are sacrificed on every night of Sukkot, or on every day of Sukkot, according to Torah. So Sukkot had those 7 or 8 days, depending on how you count it. We learned that a couple of weeks back. And so we're corresponding, we're going down in candles to correspond with that. And then for Beit Hillel, we want to go up because we want to elevate in matters of sanctity and not go down. So my question to you is, why would we keep both of these people's opinions if today we follow Hillel's opinion? Why would we keep both of their opinions in the text?
We still have disagreements.
Sure. I mean, it's validating.
As the video you showed points out, this models the concept of respectful disagreements, which is we know is not always the case in synagogue life.
Right. that it validates disagreement and shows kind of the history behind the disagreement. What do you think, Sephora?
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, like keeping that initial one um reminds you of the past. And I mean, it might be that bulls are no longer sacrificed, so that might not be relevant, but that still shows the history to know what was done before.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Right. We learn from our history, and it teaches us a way of reasoning that might not be relevant in this situation, but could be relevant in other situations.
As a derech agav, a by the way point, can I just toss on the table one other reason for going with Beit Hillel?
Sure.
From the days of the cave people, the only way, as the sun was around less and less, is that as the solstice approached, they lit more and more oil lamps to bring back the sun, and sure enough, it worked year after year. And so it probably goes back to when we first climbed out of trees down and lived in caves, the idea of increasing the light as the solstice approaches.
Absolutely. And there is a Talmudic story. I don't know if I told this story a couple weeks ago, but it's worth retelling even so. In Masechet Avodah Zarah, in the section, in a book that says that it's about idol worship, but it's not, right? Or really about avoiding idol worship, but it's not all about that. There's a beautiful story. Adam, the very first person on earth, is going about his life during this first year. He and Eve have already been kicked out of the garden, and they're going about their life, and they notice that every day the nights get longer, that it's darker longer. And it's terrifying. They think, okay, this is a punishment for eating that fruit, right? We're just going to be living in a world that's dark forever. And I mean, it's terrifying. But then when the calendar shifts, or when it shifts and winter turns into spring, the light starts getting longer and longer and longer. So the next year, Adam institutes a holiday, actually two holidays, Calenda and Saturna, which are actually Greek holidays, right? Greco-Roman holidays. He institutes basically the solstice, right? And it's presented in Talmud in a way that it reminds us of, this is the time that Hanukkah is as well. We think also this is also the time that Christmas is for Christians, right? Diwali is around the same time as well. So all of these different religious traditions, including us, look at that particular moment of the year, celebrate at that particular moment of the year because of that light. We all have these different festivals of lights. Did all of that, we touched on different topics, but did all of that answer your question about Hillel and Shammai?
Yeah, I would say so.
Nice. The other thing you had asked about last week, we haven't even gotten into prayer yet, but the other thing that you asked about last week was about Shabbat candles and how to light Shabbat candles. So the Miller Introduction to Judaism program, which Cantor Neil, if you're looking for a way to teach introductory Judaism, the curriculum I use is Miller Introduction to Judaism, and it's really wonderful. They created this Shabbat at Home packet, which I emailed to you. And it has a whole lot of different instructions about how to do all of these things, but I'll show you one way to do all of these things. So it gives us instructions about Shabbat candles. When are they lit? They're lit a minimum of 18 minutes before sundown on Friday evening. And in our emails, we have a candle lighting time. So that's around the time at which you light those candles. We light 2 candles, and I'll show you here. It's a little hard to do when I'm not at my desk, but I've got 2 candlesticks here. And you can use tea lights, you can use any candles. a lot of people will like to designate their own candlesticks just because it makes the mitzvah more beautiful. It's a more beautiful experience. So we take those 2 candles, and it's 2 because remember we learned last week shamor v'zachor, remember and keep. So we say shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, remember and keep were said in one breath. So we have these 2 candles to remember that there are things that we do on Shabbat, there are things that we don't do on Shabbat, and they both contribute to what you're saying, that making room for God. So the first thing we do is we light the 2 candles, 1, 2. The second thing is that we bring in the light by waving our hands. Now, once we get the blessing down, we cover our eyes during the blessing. But when you're first learning the blessing, you don't have to cover your eyes. But here's the blessing, and let's try to learn how to say it. First of all, you're welcome to say any of these blessings in English when you're doing it at home and to add your own blessings. But let's try to say this transliteration together, or the Hebrew, because I know you're learning how to read Hebrew. So just to put you on the spot, Sephora, can you try to, actually, before you try to read it on your own, let's try repeat after me style, just to learn that blessing. Ready? So, Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Eloheinu melech haolam.
Asher.
Asher.
Hideshanu.
Hideshanu.
B'mitzvotav.
B'mitzvotav.
V'tzivanu. Lehadlik ner.
Ladlik ner.
Nice. Shel Shabbat.
On Shabbat.
And if you ever want to learn how to do tefillah, Cantor Neil is your person. He's internationally known for teaching tefillah. But you say that blessing and then you uncover your eyes and you've got that light in front of you. We light the candles on Shabbat to remind us this is our last moment of work before the weekend. Because remember, lighting a fire was one of those things we don't do on Shabbat. This is our last moment of work. And so just to make sure that we have enough light to enjoy the evening, we light these Shabbat candles as that last moment. We come into Shabbat with light, and remember at the end of Shabbat with Havdalah, we'll come out of Shabbat with light as well. I'll show you, I'm just in Rabbi Feivel's office because we got that flash flood warning earlier and I didn't want to drive, but I'm looking here, and for some reason on that table over there are these are some old Shabbat candlesticks, and I know they're old because they're heavy. So it's been a practice throughout Jewish history, to have these gorgeous ornate candles. And
I actually am the custodian of a pair that was brought from Europe by my great grandmother at the turn of the 20th century, and they will go down to my eldest granddaughter, which will mean that they will have come from her great grandmother, and they are extremely heavy.
Wonderful. And one thing that's wonderful, that's great about this guide, this Shabbat at Home guide, is that we've got QR codes for audio. So if you want to hear the blessing and practice it, you can do that as well.
If I can ask you to send me a URL for finding this thing, you're right. This is definitely something that I should be using.
Sure, absolutely. Well, actually, so I'm not allowed to share Miller materials for free, but your community, or you can either as a community affiliate with the Miller program, or you can, actually they're looking for teachers. So if you're interested in teaching for the Miller program, they're looking for teachers. So I can give you that information.
Yeah, please, because I'm retired from this reform. My last synagogue was reformed, so they probably, since Miller is conservative, they probably wouldn't qualify.
Some
But,
Reform synagogues will do it as well, but you can be they do online classes, so
wow, that would be incredible.
yeah, you can be a Miller teacher, but they have their own curriculum and they've got
Okay.
rules about sharing it.
That's fine. I just need to know how to get in touch with them because I've heard of them, but I don't have any info.
Yeah, I'll let you know. It's really wonderful. I
Mhm.
think it's a wonderful program. I'm a big
No,
fan.
I've heard of it, but not in a context where I could ask anybody about finding them.
So before we jump into more concrete material about prayer, for both of you, Judaism has a combination of set prayer, of prayers that are written on a page in a book, and ways to make it our own. So we call that keva, fixed prayer, and kavanah, which is intention. So what would be a benefit to having fixed prayer? What's a benefit to having fixed prayer?
Yeah, covering the bases.
Covering the bases, what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm reflecting at JTS Education, which talked about the fact that there's an underlying structure of creation, revelation, redemption in the Shema section. And actually, since graduating seminary, have gotten much into the concept of the Amidah, all Amidot, being versions of the old suzerainty covenant, and we have a suzerain, it's God.
Right. So it's a theological structure. It reflects our theology, our unified theology. That not just, I'm not the only person who believes this, but we are the people who believe this. What else? What are some other benefits to fixed prayer? What have you seen in the few weeks you've been at our synagogue, Sephora? What's been a benefit of having fixed prayer?
Well, it allows for, a unity of chanting them, that, the memorization and you kind of the expectation, and that's what you're repeating. I know it's helpful for me because I'm learning. So, yeah, and I'm often reading the transliteration because I'm not yet clear on the Hebrew, and I love what I read. So it's like I'm hearing the beauty of the Hebrew language, and then I'm reading the beauty of the prayers. And so I like having those. I like repeating those because it just gives me a sense of peace. It reinforces the peace that it makes me feel.
Right. So it's peaceful literature in itself. The literature itself, it's been crafted over thousands of years and put together from all these different sources. It's beautiful because there's really real thought that's gone into it. It follows our expectations. When we go into the room at the end of the week, Friday is a tough day for a lot of us. And so at the end of the day on Friday night, we know we're going to be able to sing all of the songs that sing the songs that we're expecting and hear the words that we're expecting, chant along, learn something new every week, but in the format that we know. I think also you touched on that unity in community. We can, now that we have this set prayer, we have songs that we can sing together. We have melodies we can sing together. And you touched on that theology as well. It teaches us a specific theology. What I like too about this structured prayer is that it teaches us how to talk to God. So it gives us a vocabulary for how to talk to God. I learn how to have my unfixed conversations from what I say from that book.
Yeah.
So what are some benefits to praying without that structure? Oops.
having a personalized type of relationship with the bringing your specific concerns or questions.
Like that. I also want to add to the keva, to the fixed prayer, that for many, one of the benefit of fixed prayers is the belief that that's what we're commanded to do. For a lot of people, we are commanded to say these specific words at these specific times. And so we do it not because of any inherent benefit, but because that's what God says. So absolutely, with Kavanah, having that personalized relationship with God, bringing specific concerns and questions. For you, Cantor Neil, when you talk to God on your own, or when you pray a little bit differently than you normally do, what's the benefit of that?
It's hard to say this without sounding, I'll use the old term hokey, but in this safe audience, I can say that I actually feel that God works in my life, and I am not shy about talking with God. An example is it had been when I was reporting to a couple people the way I was experiencing a referral to a realtor in North Carolina. They said, she's not treating you right. You should ask for a different realtor. Well, just this morning, she beat me to the punch and saved me the trouble by reflecting on the fact that I was being asking too many questions too early, given the fact that I'm not actually moving there till April. No, she didn't want to meet with me in person when I'm visiting next week, which shocked me. I would think a realtor would want to at least meet a client face to face if they were going to be around. And she said, find somebody else. So I look at something like that as she saved me the service of having to, quote, fire her, unquote, by disengaging from me first. I mean, to me, there's no such thing as coincidences. It's just happened way too often, both in my career and since I've retired.
Right. God works. So we talk to God because we know that God is there, and that talking to God has that effect. I think also for me, it's talking to God, making space to talk to God is a reminder to me of all of the things that you're saying, that God is present. Right? When I sit down with a prayer book and I dive in the words on the page, I pray the words on the page. There's sometimes it's habit, but when I add my own words to it, after I'm done with my prayers, when I expand on that in my own words, it's a reminder that this isn't just a rote practice, that this is actually bringing me in relationship with God. And it helps me to bring God more into my time outside of prayer. So I'd love for us to read a quote by Abraham Joshua Heschel, who we visited a lot here. Sephira, I would love for you to read this quote, and then we'll talk about what is, for Heschel, what's his take on keva versus kavanah, on fixed versus more inner devotion, as he says.
There is a specific difficulty of Jewish prayer. There are laws, keva, how to pray, when to pray, what to pray. There are fixed times, fixed ways, fixed tests. On the other hand, prayer is worship of the heart, the outpouring of the soul, a matter of inner devotion, kavanah. In this way, Jewish prayer is guided by two opposite principles: order and outburst, regularity and spontaneity, uniformity and individuality, law and freedom, a duty and a prerogative, empathy and self-expression, insight and sensitivity, creed and faith. These principles are two poles about which Jewish prayer revolves. I like that.
Wonderful. What do you like about it?
Well, there's just a balance to it. It's a balance in that there's the structure. I want to say, it makes me think, I have the yin and yang tattooed on my hand. And so it makes me think about the balance of the feminine and the masculine energies, in that the masculine energy provides a structure, and whereas the feminine energy is the flow and the emotion, you could say. Like the masculine energy could be the rational, and the emotion is the feminine. So I don't know, that's just one thing that comes to mind, but it's just balance. And so it allows me to have a structure, and then also bring in my own personality and my own relationship with God. So it feels good. The balance feels good.
It's kind of like what you were saying with Shamor v'Zachor, with the remembering and keeping of Shabbat. You have there are the things that you do on Shabbat, but then we leave enough space that we can let God in. So there are the words that we say in our prayers to give us guidance. And then sometimes we withdraw from that to let God in, to let our personal relationship with God in. We have to have that balance. We can't have, in Judaism, there's not much, there aren't many times when we do fixed prayer with no room for creativity. And there isn't much time where we are creative without room for fixed prayers. They're always interplaying.
Was that quote an article? I don't remember a complete Heschel book with that title, The Spirit of Jewish Prayer.
It looks like, I'm guessing because it's in quotes, it's probably an article, but I'm sure we can Google it and see.
I mean, I don't want to take class time for that, but I thought I had read everything Heschel had written in English over the years, but this is a really crucial quote that would actually make sense into my textbook, and
Yeah.
I will of course also give you credit
Yeah,
for
let me know.
putting on the table.
So part of the experience of fixed prayer are not just the words in the book, but the items that we use. So this raised platform, you may have heard this word over the past few weeks. This raised platform is called a bima, and it comes from this word of height. So it's literally the height, the bima. We have, in our synagogue, we don't have a cantor and a rabbi. We have either a cantor when Cantor Neil was here, or a rabbi, who's me, or a congregant who's leading services. So it doesn't just have to be a cantor or a rabbi up on the bima, but it can be anybody who's leading the service. We have the ark, which is called Aron Kodesh, or Aron HaKodesh, that has the Torah in it. At Agudat Achim, we've got multiple Torot that are in the Aron. We typically just use one on a Shabbat when we have enough people. We typically just use one, but sometimes on holidays we'll use two or even three, but that's very rare. The Ner Tamid is the light that you see hanging up above the Aron, and that's to signify the light that was lit continuously in the tabernacle and in the temple.
Oh, nice.
So we have prayer books, which are called Sidurim, and we don't have a talit rack, but we have a pile of talitot, of prayer shawls that people can take. And I'll show you in just a couple minutes a talit and another ritual object to fill in that we can explore a little. In fact, rather than watching these videos, I'm going to go get my talit and tefillin just to show you these different objects. So wait one moment.
Cantor Neil.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm a singer also.
You have a beautiful voice just for speaking. I'm sure you have a beautiful singing voice.
Oh, thank you. Well, and I am loving learning Hebrew, and so I look forward to singing it. So
Hmm. Well, as Rabbi Sidney knows, there's very little that we ever just say in Hebrew. Almost everything has a melody, including 6 different chants for different parts of the Hebrew Bible. And um, my audition sermon for this Reformed synagogue was singing Mi Chamocha 14 different ways. They gave me the job anyway, and when in the 3 years that I stayed here at the end of my career, they would say, "You teach too much, you're too academic." It finally dawned on me, I said, "Well, you heard an academic sermon in song, you hired me anyway." So yes, we the same words when they're used on different occasions are sung different ways, and that's actually the main subject of my prayer book, of my textbook.
Looking forward to reading your textbook. I'm
Thank
interested.
you. I don't know that you will have too much to learn from it, but because I know
Sure I
from
will.
having actually shared the Bema with you at your audition that you have a beautiful voice and you certainly know what you're doing musically.
Thank you. This is a talit or a prayer shawl, kind of like the Shabbat candles. Different people wear different talitot. My favorite color is purple. This is not a talit that I wear on the bima anymore because it's too heavy, and as I'm getting older, my shoulders are getting not as strong. But a talit or a prayer shawl we put on as a reminder of the mitzvot, and I can show us that paragraph. I don't think it's in my slides, but I can show us that paragraph that teaches us about tzitzit. But my talit here has the blessing before putting on tzitzit, putting on the talit. This is called an atara. This is the label, the big label. We've got 4 corners to our talit. In the blessing before the Shema, we say, bring us in peace from the 4 corners of the earth. And we remind ourselves that there are Jews all over the world, the 4 corners of the earth, metaphorically, of course. And so during that prayer, we bring those 4 corners together. These fringes have certain patterns of knots and twists that in some sense add up to 613. Not really, but we can pretend that they add up to 613, which is our symbolic amount of commandments that there are in Torah. So we look at our fringes to remind us of all of the mitzvot, of all of the stuff that we're supposed to do and not do to show our love for God. I want to find that paragraph, the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, so that we can read it and figure out why in the world are we wearing these fringes. I'll say also that a lot of people, Rabbi Feivel included, will wear not only this big shawl while praying, but they wear a smaller garment with 4 corners and the tzitzit and the fringes at the end all the time. So not just during prayer. Let me try to find this 3rd paragraph. What were you saying, Cantor?
I was just going to ask whether you're going to model how to wear yours or whether you want me to grab one of mine while you're looking here.
I'm happy to model it, but let's read this paragraph. So this is an old translation, but I'll go through it. And Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make throughout their generations fringes in the corners of their garments." So this is the prayer where you hear the word tzitzit a lot, and everybody kisses their fringes at the corners of their garments, and that they put with the fringe or with the tzitzit of every corner a thread of blue, and it shall be unto you for a fringe, tzitzit, that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of Adonai and do them, and that you not go about after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you use to go astray, that you may remember and do all of my commandments. Be holy unto your God. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God. So why carry these things around or wear these things around?
As a reminder.
As a reminder of
The mitzvah, the commandments.
Right. And we do that during prayer, but for the people who are wearing it all the time, it's really a reminder. It's a reminder during the day, because you've got these, annoying little fringes that are coming out of the bottom of your shirt. They get caught on things. They're a good thing to fidget with. And so all the time that these mitzvot are something that we do, not just in the synagogue, but out in our lives as well. And I would imagine for Cantor Neil, if he wears his kippah everywhere, that he's reminded, right? He's reminded all the time that he's Jewish, that these mitzvot are important. It's a similar sort of thing. We wear these garments, these Jewish garments, to remind ourselves that we have these mitzvot that we follow all the time. So I'll show putting on this talit. It's a little hard to see on Zoom with placement here, but with this one, it's very big. So what I tend to do is I'll say the blessing. I can read the blessing from here, from my atara, from my big label. And then I like to put the talit over my head and say hello to God, talk to God a little bit. And then I drape this over the corner, over my shoulders. And so I'll pray with it like this. On my back here, the fringes are, two of the fringes are kind of dangling down the back. At the synagogue now, I tend to wear a smaller talit because this big wool one is a little too heavy on my shoulders. But that's the one I use when I'm at home, when I'm davening at home.
Well, I will tell you, even though I wasn't this observant in northern Minnesota, but having gone back to Minnesota in the middle of my career before moving to Louisiana, and having spent 6 years up in Saskatchewan, in the middle of Saskatoon, sometimes having a gigantic wool talit to keep you snugly warm when the synagogue's furnace is having trouble keeping up with 40 below, sometimes it feels nice.
That's what originally inspired me to get a wool talit, was because a lot of synagogues have really intense air conditioning, which I am not a fan of. I'm sure if I were wearing a suit and tie, I'd be a fan, but I guess I should start wearing a suit and tie then. So there's another prayer garment that's not as well known, and this is called tefillin. And the reason you may not have seen tefillin, this is my tefillin bag. The reason you may not have seen tefillin before is because it's just worn on weekdays. The holiday is seen as so special that we don't need that extra boost that the tefillin gives us. So I'll show you how to put on tefillin, and then I'll show you that verse of the Shema again, just so that you can see where the commandment for tefillin comes from. So these are boxes. These have different paragraphs of the Shema in them. So this box, I'll take off my watch, show you. This box I put over on the inside of my bicep. when I put it on, I say a blessing. I say, I say the blessing, thanking God for the commandment for laying tefillin. Strap it onto my arm. And I wrap this leather strap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Why do you think 7 times? What's the Jewish significance of the number 7?
Days of creation, was it?
7 days of creation. Great. So I wrap that 7 times. Then I put this loosely on my head. I say, before I put it on of tefillin, and then I say that blessing, and mine is tangled right now, but I straighten it out so that it's above my hairline and in the middle of my head, and make sure that these black straps are shown. And this is what I wear when I'm praying in the morning. This is not what I'm wearing when I pray in the morning right now, because my child spits up on everything. So I honestly have not worn tefillin in a while because I really don't want him to spit up on my tefillin. But the last step is that I make this design on my fingers. So I wrap above and below my knuckle, around this finger, and then around this hand, and I'll show you why. Everybody does this a little bit differently, but when people wrap their tefillin, they tend to do it in a way where you can see 3 letters. They're upside down here, but you can see a shin, a dalid, which is this here, and a yud, which spell Shaddai, which is one of the many names of God. So these are tefillin. And while I'm taking my tefillin off, I'm going to show the first paragraph of the Shema. And I would love for you to tell me, where in this first paragraph do you think the commandment for tefillin is given? Once you see it, you can say it.
Spirit, you see it in the second half?
Thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand.
And they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, whatever frontlets are, right? So they're again, these kind of physical reminders. When I put on tefillin, it feels like God is hugging me. And when we wear talit and tefillin in the morning, we tend to do so together. So we'll wear them at the same time. But it's kind of a hug from God. A lot of people will look at it and say, oh, that looks scary, or that looks painful, but we put it on in a way that's not harmful or that's not painful.
While you're taking that all off, can I tell you a very quick funny story about females wearing tefillin?
Sure.
So I'm from that generation of JTS students that fought very hard to have women admitted, which happened 3 years after I graduated, admitted to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. So when my eldest son was 12, I've been going to the New Cage Conference, I think once counted 40 out of the 47 of them, Jewish Educators Conference, and they always have exhibitors, and one from whom I still buy lulavim every year for Sukkot, he sells tefillin, and the year before, my son, knowing that there's another one coming down the road a year and a half later, I asked if I could buy tefillin for both boys. And he said, sure, and he sold me 2 beautiful pair of tefillin. I bring them home, and their younger sister says, "Nu, where's my pair?" So the following year, in a different city, go to the same conference, go to the same vendor, and I say, remember I've got 3 kids? He said, yes, I hope they like their tefillin. I said, remember that they have a younger sister? And he said, yeah, I remember you mentioning that. He said, well, and I told him the story. And then I asked, will you sell me a pair, knowing that they're going to be used daily by a young lady? And he said, sure. So I have the blessing of having 3 kids who are all married, who are keeping Shabbat, and who are regularly attending synagogue, and one of whom is a professional Jewish educator. And they are raising my grandkids pretty much the way they were raised.
Wonderful. You must have done something right.
Well, among the things that I think contributed to the fact is that we didn't even have TV in the house, much less not watching on Shabbat. We didn't listen to music on Shabbat, though. We played board games. And I like to say that no TV in the house may have something to do with 4 master's degrees and 1 PhD so far among the 3 of them, not to mention what their spouses have earned.
Wonderful. So our basic prayer service, we've got lots of different prayer services, but there's a typical format to each service. So first there's the warm up. Actually, before that, I should mention that there are 3 or 4 services throughout the day, in addition to all the blessings that we say throughout the day. So our 3 or 4 services throughout the day, we have in the morning, oops, writing in white probably isn't super helpful. We've got, in the morning, we've got what's called shacharit. On Shabbat, we have Musaf after Shacharit. Musaf literally means additional, but on Shabbat and holidays, we've got Musaf. Afternoon, we've got Mincha, which I don't think, Sephora, you've been to yet. We don't have a whole lot of Mincha services at Agudat Achim. And then in the evening, we have what's called Mariv. So each of these services has a different format, but there are a lot of similarities. So in our Shacharit, so for all of the services, they start out with a warm-up. In our Shacharit service, that is in the form of some morning blessings and a whole lot of psalms. In the afternoon service, it's in the form of 1 psalm, which is Ashrei. We like to call it Ashrei, so that's the first word. And in the evening, in the evening, at least on Shabbat evening, we sing a whole lot of different psalms. On the weekdays, there's 1 verse that's our introduction, but on Shabbat, we've got a lot of psalms that we sing as an introduction. These are all of our warm-up. In the morning and in the evening, actually, in the morning and the evening, we have the Shema, which is our declaration of faith, surrounded by other blessings. So surrounded by blessings, by a call to prayer, a blessing about creation, a blessing of revelation, a blessing after about redemption. A lot of people will say that a lot of the prayer service is designed to go through creation, revelation, and redemption. So creation as in God created the world, revelation as in God showed God's self to the people Israel, specifically at Sinai, and redemption as in both God delivered us from Egypt and God will deliver us in time to come. But in the center of that is the Shema, which is that declaration of faith, and the 3 paragraphs that come after that. The 3 paragraphs, the first is Ve'ahavta, which you may have heard. And that first paragraph is all about love God. Here's how: follow mitzvot, remind yourself. And we can go over those blessings a little bit more in detail if you're interested. The second is all about cause and effect. You do great things will happen. You do not so great things will happen. the important thing to remember there is that we're talking to us as a community, right? For all of us, sometimes we do great things and terrible things happen anyway, or vice versa, right? But as a community, the more good we do, the more good we'll see. The more not so good we do, the less good we'll see. Okay? So first paragraph is love God. Second paragraph is cause and effect. And third paragraph is that paragraph about tzitzit that we spoke about before. We say that twice a day in the morning and evening. In morning, afternoon, and evening, we have the Amidah, which is our standing audience with God. That's the time during the prayer service where we're all silent, we're standing, and we're either saying the words that are on the page or the words that are in our heart. Now, there's a format to these words on the page that I think is really important to know. In the weekdays, the format of these Amidah prayers are praise, so their praise, bakashot, which is requests, and hoda'ah, which is thanks. So we start out, wow, God, you're wonderful. Then we go on to all the things that we'd like God to do for us. And then we end with both, well, thanks and peace. We end with, thank you, God. Please accept my prayer and please bring peace upon the world. Right. On holidays, on Shabbat and holidays, we don't like to ask God for stuff because we love the world as it is. We're trying not to alter the world today on Shabbat. So we have instead a blessing for Shabbat and the holidays. So that middle section is either requests or Shabbat and holidays. And then, of course, there's always the option too, when you're going through the Amidah, to add your own prayers onto what's written. So for me, when I get to the thank you part, I like to list all the things that I'm thankful for. Right? When I get to, during the week, the God give me success part, if I'm struggling with something, if I'm studying for a test, if I'm trying to figure out, let's see, what's something that I want to be successful for? If I'm studying for a test, or if I've got a project going on at the synagogue that I really want to succeed, I'll take a moment after I say that prayer, that written prayer, and ask God for that specifically. So we have the warm up, we have the blessings surrounding the Shema, we have the Amidah, and then we have on Shabbat, Monday, and Thursday mornings, we have the Torah reading, where we take the Torah out of the Ark and we read some of that book of Torah, sometimes even Haftarah. We end the service with a sort of conclusion, and along with some songs and with announcements sometimes, with songs and announcements, we also have Aleinu, which is that prayer where we stand up, we face the ark is opened. I love hear how it says gratitude for being Jewish, but what I like to say is this is okay, you're about to leave, it's your responsibility to do all this stuff that you've been saying, right? We're about to go, and Aleinu it's upon us. So it's upon us. All of this stuff we've been talking about, it's our responsibility, not just God's. So I think for me, that's the send-off of Aleinu. And then we have a Kaddish, we've got a prayer in memory of the deceased. You've also got little Kaddishes, little versions of that same Kaddish prayer interspersed throughout the service. So that's a lot to throw at you at the same time, all at once. Do you have any questions either about this or the prayer service as you've seen it so far?
The only thing that I would add is that specifically the interspersing of the Kaddishes is at the conclusion of each section.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like an announcement that you're about to change and go in another direction.
Right. And the text of the Kaddish is, God is wonderful and great, and yay, God. Right? Refocusing us. And the Kaddish is only said when you've got a minyan, when you've got a group of 10 Jews in the room, 10 Jewish adults in the room. And so it's not only yay God, but it's yay God and yay us. We got together a community. Any questions, Sephora?
No.
It's quite a lot, but I'm also happy to, for you or for anybody who's watching, I'm happy to sit down with a Siddur and go over this a little bit more in detail with the book in front of us, because it's a lot to visualize. We talked about Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv. Kabbalat Shabbat is that service before the Friday night, the intro to the Friday night service. Musaf is just an extra Amidah to after the Shabbat morning service, just to say, it literally means additional. It's an extra additional service just to say, we love God so much, let's add more time onto the service. And Havdalah, there are also biblical reasons too, and there was an additional sacrifice on each of these days. And so the Amidah, in a sense, is a replacement for the sacrifices. We'll talk about that, maybe not this week, but next week I've got a text that we can learn about that. Or maybe in the next 15 minutes, we'll see. But Havdalah is also a service that we do at the very end of Shabbat. You have probably heard quite a bit in visiting services that introduction of Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam ... When you hear that, that means this is a formal blessing. It's literally, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. We say this blessing, this first introduction here, when we are saying thank you for anything. So before we eat food, when we see a rainbow in the sky, after we go to the bathroom, we use this blessing a whole lot. I like to call this, when I'm teaching about blessings, I like to call this introduction the introduction to thank you blessings. So these are thank you blessings. The blessings that start with this introduction are thank you blessings. If it goes Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Asher Kidshanu B'mitzvotav, who makes us holy through your mitzvot and commands us to ... This is the introduction that we give to mitzvah blessings. These are the blessings. This is the blessing we would say before we light Shabbat candles or before we put on talit or tefillin. So what would be, I told you some examples, but what do you think is something I would say a thank you blessing on, a blessing that just has that first phrase?
My living room looks out on the west, so I wind up saying the Oseh Maaseh Bereshit blessing over sunsets, especially now that I'm retired and I'm home when the sun is setting. I'm getting to see some beautiful sunsets to the west of my house, because I'm on the highest land in my corner of the southwest corner of the town.
Beautiful.
So no buildings in the way.
The blessing over sunsets, that's something to say a thank you blessing. Sephora, what's something that you think may have a thank you blessing associated with it?
Overcoming obstacles or surviving certain challenges, healing.
Absolutely. And in the Amidah, there is one of these blessings for healing in the weekday Amidah. And also, if I'm trying to think, Cantor, when we're doing, why am I forgetting what it's called? The blessing that we do during an Aliyah when somebody survives.
Birkat Gomel.
Birkat Gomel, is that a blessing?
That's an interesting question, whether it's in blessing form. I think it might be. I've got an old Siddur Sim Shalom right nearby. Let me just check and see if it starts with It's been so long since
So-
I've been in a situation where, let me get to Shabbat morning. All right, I'm in the Torah service. Let's look at quickly how I quick back and find it.
So there is a blessing, whether or not it's in this blessing form, but there's a formal blessing we do in public if we've survived a life-threatening experience, gone through childbirth, or gone abroad, gone overseas.
My instinct is that I think it might be in blessing form, but this is interesting. I'm looking right in the Torah service, and it's not. Oh, I see why, because I'm in the afternoon service. Let me go to the Shabbat morning service and see
So then,
whether
Sephira, what's a mitzvah you think that we might say the mitzvah blessing over?
Yes, probably. Before eating, before a meal.
So before a meal, we say the thank you blessing. Okay, we just say that first bit. But when we're doing a specific mitzvah, we add on that second part. So what's a ritual mitzvah you think we might say it on?
Oh, lighting Shabbat candles.
Yes, right. The blessing that we did before on Shabbat candles has that Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav. So when you hear that Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav vitzivanu, that means we are about to do a mitzvah.
I found Birkat Komel, if we can go back to that for a second. Let me
Sure.
read it. It is, I was right, it is a bracha shel bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hagomel l'chayavim tovot shegmalani kol tov. And then the congregation responds, mish either shegmalcha or shegmalech kol tov, hu yigmalcha for men, yigmalech for women, kol tov sela. So it's definitely the thank you blessing form.
Can you read the English for that?
Yes,
This
of course.
is the blessing
I'm sorry.
over, this is the blessing we say publicly for if we've gone through a life-threatening situation.
And I'll make it egalitarian in the process. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who graciously bestows favor upon the undeserving, even as God has bestowed favor upon me. And the congregation responds, may God, who has been gracious to you, continue to favor you with all that is good. And then that untranslatable word "sela," which the scholars think might mean you're done.
Or hooray!
Oh, that's
or cue
interesting.
music. Or cue
Oh.
music.
I like that. Thank you.
Of course.
I'll keep this out in case we need it for anything.
Great. I'm looking at the time, and I want to go through one other thing, and then we can finish this conversation. We can continue this conversation next week, but this is one of my favorite blessings, the Asher Yatzar blessing. This is the blessing that we say every time we go to the bathroom, after we go to the bathroom. And yesterday or on Tuesday, we were in Dallas at the school that Feivel's about to work at, and they had a picture, they had this blessing posted outside of every bathroom. So we're going to ask ourselves a few questions about this blessing. What do you imagine was the real life human experience which led a poet to write this text? Why the God talk? What does God have to do with it? And how does it relate to me? So Sephira, can you read this out loud?
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed man with wisdom and created with him many openings and many cavities. It is obvious and known before your throne of glory that if even one of them would be opened, or if even one of them would be sealed, it would be impossible to survive and to stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh and acts wondrously.
All right. So, I think I think numbers 1 and 3 are pretty similar, but what's the real life human experience, whether personal or not? What's the real life human experience that you think leads to this, led somebody to read this, to write this text?
Maybe he had some health issues that were healed, and then he was able to go to the bathroom. you know, that's what comes.
I know that I've been there, that I've been in a place where, I think we've all been sick to some extent, where the day after, the first day that you feel well, there's this sigh of relief that after you've gone to the bathroom the first time, that feels good. Oh, finally, right? And or even when it's a prolonged illness, and at least, you know what, at least I can do this one act. At least I can, at least my what is it, openings and cavities work well enough that I can at least do this. Wonderfully. What does God have to do with all this?
Well, God's the ultimate healer.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I will tell you, you have a whole generation to go before your retirement, Rabbi, but one thing I will tell you is that in retirement, the single most common interaction I have with the people who were my congregants and remain my friends, many of them, is they call me and ask me to do a mishaberach for this, that, and the other person, and weeks go by where I might wind up doing 3 different mishaberachs for 3 different people in the course of a week, all on the phone.
Right, and a mishaberach is a prayer for healing.
Right.
So it's that this is the prayer that we say after we've healed. Yes, we say the Birkat HaGomel in front of people, but this is our personal prayer for healing, and our personal prayer to remind ourselves that even when we're perfectly healthy, or that when we are perfectly healthy, it's a blessing. And poetically, we can't see it in English, but poetically, it's a beautiful prayer to say. It's got in it the many openings and many cavities doesn't do it justice. So in Hebrew, it's nikavim, nikavim, chalulim, chalulim, right? It's not just many openings and many cavities, but it's more than we can count, right? You see those diagrams of the human body, and there's no way to count where one cavity ends and one opening begins. And there's no way for us to count that number of openings and that number of cavities that exist in our body, but it's so many, and somehow God put these all together and created us. I think also, in a sense, we are asking God to take responsibility. God, you created us, and thank you for letting my body work right now, but remember, because you created us, you got to make sure that this whole body thing works.
I've always found it fascinating. I was really good friends with Debbie Friedman, Zichrono Livracha, and I'm not aware, I haven't checked, but I don't know that this prayer even exists in the Reform Siddur, certainly not in the older one. But it intrigued me a lot that she wrote a song for this prayer, and I knew her well enough to know that she was fighting an illness which ultimately took her at age 59, and she may have written it partly because of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie Friedman is I don't know if you've listened to too much of her music, but she's really one of the pioneers of bringing guitar into the synagogue. She brought it in through the Reform movement when she was probably younger than Rabbi Sidney, and from there it spread into the conservative movement.
Mm-hmm. And beyond. So I want to respect the time, because I know that Rabbi Feibel has to be somewhere, so I'm soon on kid duty. But I have an assignment for, if you're coming for Sephora, for you, for anybody who's watching online who's coming back next week, and for Cantor Neil, if you'd like to come back.
I would
I'd
love
love-
to, but I'm going to be in North Carolina looking at, driving around, looking at roads and hopefully a couple houses.
Well, I'll
Sorry.
be in Los Angeles, but that's the wonder of Zoom. I'll be in Los Angeles next week. But what I want us to try to do is we spoke today about fixed prayer, mostly. I'd like it for us to find a time to write a letter to God. Don't worry about what you believe, don't believe. You can address this letter to God or the universe, to whom it may concern. And then wait for God to answer back. Write what we think, what might God respond to our letter? And sometimes this experience is surprising. Next week, we're not going to share the text of that, but I'd love for us to share what that experience felt like. One last question that I'd like to ask is, with this, we've talked about Keva and Kavanagh as a sort of distinction, but how do you think that the two might come together within Jewish prayer? Where do the two meet? The fixed prayer and the spontaneous inspiration, or the personal intentional prayer?
I would say how we do it, and of course, in my life, the music reflects that.
Right. I know that when I'm leading services, I'll pick a tune depending on what the room feels like. Right. Is this room a room that wants the same prayer that they've been singing for the past 50 years because they need that comfort today? Or is this a room that is energetic and wants something new? Right. I think the music absolutely reflects the character.
Have we got a moment that I can give a very startling musical extremes of one well-known prayer?
Sure.
Moshe Rothblum, which setting of Vishamru, which he wrote for a camp play at Ramah. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat b'chasot, versus Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית העולם. So that
They're
would
both
be
the same
probably
prayer.
the extreme examples of energizing a hopping congregation versus soothing and using Vishamru almost as a lullaby to bring us into Shabbat, which is my preference, because for me, I cheerfully say I would not be around at age 70 if it weren't for the fact that I've kept Shabbat very strictly. It's forced me to get off the hamster wheel of life. Once a
Life
week.
is kind of like a hamster wheel. Sephora, what do you think might be an interaction between the Keva and the Kavanagh, the fixed and the intentional?
Well, I don't know, I answered that earlier, but just kind of to have the balance of the structure and then also the personal expression.
Right.
Well,
So
and
wait,
think about there's something about the Kavanagh about creativity. So I almost feel like it's inviting some creativity in the way that you pray, your own personality.
yeah. When somebody leads a service, they can infuse their own personality into it, or when you're praying at home. So my prayer looks a lot different when I'm able to stand up and sit down as I traditionally have, or as I've been told to do, and when I'm holding a little kid. Those prayer
Right.
experiences, even though I'm saying the same words, look very, very different. Similarly, where am I? A prayer is that prayer service is gonna feel very different if I'm out in the wilderness, or if I'm in a sanctuary, or if I'm at home. It's gonna feel different if I'm in a tiny congregation with 10 people in the room, and it's going to feel different if I'm in a huge congregation with 1,000 people in the room. So every one of those prayer experiences, even though we have that fixed text, can feel drastically different. Sometimes even feel better, feel not so great, but every prayer experience is going to feel a little bit different depending on what we've gone through that day and where we are and who we're with.
Yeah, I appreciate to what you just said, because you're talking about being outside or, in different situations, because it's like there's 100 different ways to pray. And in studying different religions and, and all of that's been part of what I wanted to really know. I wanted to get a sense that I could connect with God, just me and God, in a way that was organic and not necessarily on the page or in a language or in a place. So I appreciate that.
One more comment before I go take my child. But there is a Hasidic practice called hitbodedut, which is just talking to God. So the Hasids, the Breslovers, the spiritual descendants of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov will go out into an outdoor space and will talk to God, and they'll pace around and they'll yell and they'll sing, and just whatever comes out. It's that process of talking to God without any form. So that is a Jewish practice also. Thank you for learning with me. It's wonderful to see you, Cantor Neil, and I'll learn with you all again soon.
Thank you so much for being our teacher today. I feel very honored to have learned from you, and if you will not only share the information about how I can track down this Miller curriculum, Introduction to Judaism, but also remind me of your contact information directly. It may be good to have a couple more conversations before I put my textbook to bed, and you may be able to help me make it into an even better a better tool for lay learners.
Absolutely. So I'll send you, I think I still have your email, but if not, I know that I
Oh,
still
make
have
sure you use the Gmail one.
the Gmail one.
I had, during my time here, I had a horrible cyber attack. So it's the Cantor Neil S7,
Mhm.
but now it's at gmail.com.
Okay. And if I can't find that, then I'll text you because I do have your phone number.
Yes, the 612 number has not changed.
All right.
This was amazing. Thank you for the blessing of studying with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. Have a wonderful week.